Good morning or afternoon, everyone. This is Kathleen Costello coming at you live for our PCADI conversation today. And I'm joined here today with Coach Jeff. Hi, Jeff. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, Kathleen, I'm doing good.
Awesome. Well, everyone, Jeff and I, both mostly I, have been having technical issues this morning. So it's a really great segue into our conversation on emotional regulation. Because I don't know about you all, but probably one of the things that boils my blood more than anything is when tech does not work, or more
Mhm.
likely that I don't know how to make it work. It's probably not that tech's the issue, it's probably the user, me. So this will be a great segue into working with triggers and everything that comes up related to emotions. Just to share a little bit, I'm part of the PCADI leadership team. PCADI is the Positive Psychology Coaching and Diversity Institute, and I'm joined with Jeff, one of our esteemed coaches. Jeff, do you just want to take a minute just to introduce yourself, maybe share where you're coming from, and anything else you'd like to share?
Sure thing, sure thing. My name is Jeff Fyans. I am coming to you from Denver, Colorado. I have a PhD in positive psychology, and I love everything about it. I'm a coach, work with a lot of creative people and leaders, so emotions are very amplified for the types of people I work with, and I'm excited to chat more about the subject with you today.
Well, thanks, Jeff. Jeff lives in one of my favorite cities in the world. I love Denver. Um, yes, absolutely. I think that's a really, I would love that, Jeff, because how emotions connect with creativity. And I think, that's a first kind of, I'd like to make that public service announcement kind of even before we dive in, because I think emotions can get, particularly when we're talking about emotional regulation, emotions can get kind of a maybe a little bit of like a negative connotation to them. And really, emotions are powerful, right? We have them for a
Mm.
reason. We have so many, we have this huge range. And I always like to say to myself and my clients, if we weren't supposed to feel emotions, we wouldn't have so many of them, right? Like they serve a purpose.
Yep.
And so that's kind of what we're going to be exploring today is like, how do emotions serve us, and how do we kind of harness them in a way to most support us in our day-to-day life. So, kind of as we just dive into this conversation, Jeff, in your work and in your experience, for you, why do you think emotional regulation and working with emotions is important?
Yeah, so emotions, they like you said, they happen. There's a million things that can trigger us throughout the day. Like we were just laughing before this about our technical issues and how our kids are bad sleepers and just of that. So I mean, in our personal and professional lives, there's so many things that can influence the way we feel, either positively or negatively. And those emotions, like if we don't harness them, if we don't acknowledge them and how they are impacting us and how they're making us feel, like they, our actions and our behaviors and our choices, they can show up, destructively, right? Not like destructive in a way where doesn't mean it's completely derailing something, but not the most constructive choice, not the best way to talk to your colleague or your boss or someone in another department that sent you an email that you think is a bit passive aggressive. Like there's so many things. Like, and it's so funny this morning about the technical issues. Like I had a bad sleep, so I woke up a little groggy and cranky. I could feel it. I got an email a little bit before I took a shower this morning that rubbed me the wrong way and got me thinking, like, is this person like trying to be like this or am I making this up? But like if we're not being aware of our triggers and how they're making us feel, like yeah, we can show up as and we can show up ineffectively, and that's as leaders, that can have a scalable impact on your team, on others, on the organization if you're not harnessing it. Like I love that word used to open things up, like harnessing our emotions, right?
Yeah. Oh, thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate your willingness to be vulnerable and share, and I can
Yeah.
totally relate. I was in the room with my little one last night because she's congested, and so yeah, same thing. Woke up this morning and was like, oh, and I think. I think you identified something that's so key as we start to work with emotions, which is self awareness, right? Is the willingness to recognize that our emotions are affected by so many things. And the example you gave, it was great, right? Because so many things affect what brings up certain emotions. You mentioned sleep, right? So the quality of our sleep, how rested we are, obviously is going to have an impact on our emotions. Different triggers, whether it's also having a little grumpy kiddo in the morning or whatever can have a factor. And then you mentioned thoughts, right? And then the
Mhm,
stories that we tell ourselves and how we interpret things, right? Like that email very much could have been passive aggressive, right? And then depending on the lens we bring to it, it may not have been, but however we're interpreting it can also have an impact. And so I think that's where that ability to kind of step back and take a minute to kind of be aware of all the factors that come into play that impact our emotions is a really powerful first step. And
mhm,
you were doing that, right? You were kind of recognizing all these factors that were at play this morning, and then recognizing also that one of the powerful things is that we have a choice, and that's what
mhm.
that's what I like to think. Emotional regulation, to be honest, to me, I don't know, feels I grew up, I went to 12 years of Catholic school, and so, like, regulation and rules and all this stuff kind of trigger things in me, so when I hear emotional regulation, it feels very, like, I don't know,
Yeah.
like, "Get yourself in check. You're not allowed to feel things, blah, blah, blah," and really, I like
Yeah.
to think of it more as, like, just, like, constructively working with emotions, like, we
Mm.
all have them. We're always gonna have them. How do we use them? Like, we've used the word harness, like, I look at energy as or emotions as energy in motion. They have an energetic kind of feel and stamp to them, and how do we use them,
Mhm.
to really support us, right? So, in that vein, it sounds like you work with a lot of creative folks and leaders. How do you see emotions kind of supporting success or maybe limiting success when you're working with people?
Yeah, so I loved what you're saying, energy and motion, and also just how the term regulation can bring up like an aversion that can bring up an emotional response as well. Like you can't control me. Like and
Mhm.
so a lot of people, one, they wish there was some way to kind of detach completely or just not be affected by emotions and be completely stoic and rational and logical.
Mhm.
Fortunately, that's probably not possible for you. But like people have that desire because they're realizing the impact, especially in the creative space. Like you said, energy and motion, like a big there's a lot of research and it comes from the creative literature and positive psychology literature on like the progress principle and momentum and how experiencing this positive momentum, this positive movement forward towards your goals is one of the most motivating and activating of creativity and productivity and performance experiences out there. So when these negative emotions come up, when frustration, when you feel afraid or triggered in a negative way, like that has real implications on impacting that motion forward, right? And so this can be very frustrating. And if one doesn't learn how to kind of step back, be self-aware, accept what's going on, and then be able to choose how to keep that momentum going forward if they desire, like they can that energy and motion that can take them in a different direction or cause them to freeze or stop or procrastinate or retreat. So these emotional signals, they really are things we need to pay attention to. And like today, going back to my story, like all these things were happening, and it was like I was getting frustrated. I was feeling annoyed. I was feeling a bit worried. Like, oh my gosh, like, am I in the wrong link? Is my computer messed up? Is this going to mess up the whole live with these technical issues? Like, all these things are happening. I could have, just threw it all up in the air and said, forget it. Or I could have showed up cranky. But like, instead, I chose, like, okay, this is pretty humorous that we're doing a talk on emotional regulation. on a morning where I'm feeling more emotionally dysregulated than usual. But just laughing about it helped me out, right? Just accepting it, kind of zooming out, seeing what's happening, choosing to just kind of approach it with humor. And now we're laughing about it. We're talking about emotions, and yeah, I feel good, feeling good now.
Awesome, Jeff. I levity and humor is such a powerful tool, one that I don't always employ when I'm feeling stressed. And and again, you just if, kind of if we were starting to identify, right, some like stepping stones to emotional regulation, I think part of it is like the slowing down a little bit, like you identified, to recognize sort of what's happening, and then that self-awareness muscle, which, I think all of us continue to strengthen, to see like, okay, well, what's really happening? Like, what are the factors that are impacting me? Why am I getting triggered?
Hmm.
And then I think the acceptance piece is sometimes the most difficult, right? Because especially if there's things happening outside of our control, then it can be really tough to accept those things and then accept the way that we're feeling towards them. And however, that's like one of the most important steps, because that's where real change can happen, right? Like even in your story, as you were describing, it kind of sounds like once there was the acceptance of like, okay, this is a little frustrating. I don't know what's
Yeah,
going on with this link. Maybe everything's not going to go how I planned. Once there was that acceptance piece, then it sounds like there could be some humor, there could be some different ways of holding it. And I 100% agree with you. I mean, same thing on my end. I was kind of just like, all right, I'm just rolling with this. Like, it's going to be what it's going to
yeah,
be. And then now here we are having a great conversation. Um, and I also really appreciated what you said, that I think I think one of the reasons that emotions for a lot of people feel maybe a little scary or daunting is because if we don't know how to work with them, they can kind of feel all encompassing, and they can feel like we don't have much control on them. And I think that's what I appreciate about where our conversation's going, is that actually we can't control the emotions that arise for us. That unfortunately we can't, right? That's based on triggers and conditioning and so much of our physiology and our psychology. We can't we can't control. Like if I'm going to feel sad, I'm going to feel sad. However, with the self-awareness and the acceptance and slowing down, we have choice in what we do with those emotions. And I think that's where it can be kind of liberating. And you also identified, once we can identify the emotion, then we know we can start to work with it. And I'm a big fan of like, what is the if energy and in motion, if emotions are information, what are they trying to inform us of, right? And like I'll use the example of sadness. Sadness and grief often kind of have a slowing down effect, right? They make us
mhm,
kind of want to turn inward, and there's some wisdom to that, right? Like maybe part of, if we're feeling sadness, it's an invitation to just step away for a minute and kind of
mm,
see, what do we need? Or like anger, can often have this like very fiery energy, and like maybe that needs to be harnessed into something like going for a
mhm,
jog or doing. So when we start to slow down enough, we can see how the emotions might start to be informing us of something, right? And that they might actually be useful in some way. I'm curious, I see you
yeah,
nodding.
yeah. No, exactly. I 100% agree. So yeah, emotions, they're information, and if we pause to take a look at them more closely and get curious about them, there's often a constructive action or something that we can do hidden within them, right? So like frustration, that's you know feels like like something's blocking you. You're angry to extend, like it's kind of a form, spin off of anger. But if you pause and you get curious about it, why am I frustrated? What's causing this? It's could turn into a really powerful opportunity to identify a problem that could be solved, or to identify a way to improve process, to do something differently, to do something better, to create something new. Can be a very powerful trigger to creativity. Same thing with like positive emotions, right? Like we don't often pause or reflect on positive emotions because it just feels good and we're like, oh, this is great, whatever. But if we pause and reflect on what's making us feel excited or energized, that could also give us insight into our strengths, our talents, things that we can amplify and do more of to create a more meaningful or fulfilling life as well. So, like all these emotions, they do have these hidden opportunities. We have to take a moment to reflect and pause on them to usually uncover those, but there's something there for us to explore. And even like from a leadership perspective, like you can do this with your people as well, right? Like you can help coach them and help them explore the triggers of their emotions and the opportunities within the emotions as well. So like definitely practicing this on yourself as a leader, starting with the self-awareness, getting curious with the emotions, asking what can I learn here? How can I leverage this? What's the opportunity from this? That's how you master this with yourself, but then you can practice this with your people too and help them with their emotional experience, right? Like emotional regulation or support, whatever you want to call it. It can be an interactive thing as well. But it definitely starts with yourself, and it is a practice, right? It's something we're not always taught to do or taught to explore. We may be, more focused on results or more objective things, the data, black and white, ones and zeros types of information. But there's so much richness in our emotions that can help us be more effective leaders if we take the time to explore them.
Absolutely, Jeff. I agree. And thanks for bringing in the positive emotions too. I think you're absolutely right that I think maybe the more difficult emotions tend to kind of grab our awareness more, right? Because they're a little uncomfortable or they're not as enjoyable as like joy or elation or happiness or and one of the things I really resonated with what you were sharing is savoring and slowing down to also recognize when we are feeling good because
Hmm.
and I think this comes out of positive psychology literature, right? That if we can reflect on feeling good, I think it's Barbara Fredrickson, right? The like 3 to 1 ratio. And this
Hmm.
idea of like, if we can feel or have like kind of three more positive, enjoyable thoughts, feelings to every one, which is always not within our control. But I think part of that is savoring. And I know that's something I've been doing more. I have, a 7-month old and she's fantastic and super fun, and trying and challenging. And, I found that some days it's so easy to end the day and be like, oh gosh, this was just such a tough day. But then if
Hmm.
I really step back and think about it, I'm like, no, actually, there were a lot of moments of joy. There was a lot of moments of happiness. There was a lot of moments of awe. And actually, then it starts to shift that ability to just as much as we maybe kind of can feel a little bit stuck sometimes in the more challenging emotions to actually start to enhance that ability to savor when we're feeling the good stuff, right? Because I think,
Definitely.
as you probably can relate, I think with positive psychology, sometimes it's gotten a little bit like this idea that like, oh, we're supposed to be positive and happy all the time. And that's not the case. It's pretty
Hmm.
much impossible, right? Going back to the
Right.
idea that we have all these emotions, we're going to feel them all. But how do we help enhance and maybe promote more of the good ones or more of the ones we enjoy? And I think you mentioned savoring,
Hmm.
and that's fantastic. And then the other thing I heard you mention is this idea of kind of validation. First, like self validation,
Hmm.
and then validation of others. And that as we start to get more comfortable and attuned to our own emotional experience, how that can help us support working with our emotions more proactively, and then how it can help us work with others.
Hmm.
And I think about this like in the coaching space. I mean, one of the most powerful things is when, as a coach, when we can see someone being emotive and we can actually ask about it, right? Like, oh, I see this
Yes.
conversation's bringing something up for you, or you're, and how almost just that acknowledgement and that willingness to be there with the person has this really powerful effect of creating a safe space and letting that person actually share what's like really going on for them. And I love that you bring that in, that like leaders can do that for their employees. Like it's okay to bring emotion into the workplace.
Hmm.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts about that, this idea of kind of are emotions okay in the workplace?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to take the perspective that yes, they are okay, because if you're not taking that perspective, you're almost invalidating emotions and you're kind of trying to suppress them or push them aside, and which isn't realistic, right? Like the workplace is probably one of the most like the most emotional place for people, especially this day and age. You know, after COVID and with everything going on in the economy, like it's a very emotional time, and the workplace triggers a lot of these emotions, right? So if you're saying it's not okay, you're missing out on a lot of opportunities to develop your leadership, to engage your people, to create a culture of belonging and psychological safety, which leads to better results and performance. It's you, whether you like it or not, like the emotions are happening, and like you said, like validating them, acknowledging them, accepting that they're happening is step one, and then it's how do you want to show up for them? What do you want to do with them? How do you make it constructive, right, if possible, or accept that you know you know not sometimes you just can't do anything about a situation, and you accept that, right? But then validating the emotion, accepting it, that's also empowering. That also frees up your mental bandwidth and your ability to focus your attention to act on something else. So it's a complex thing, emotions in the workplace. But yeah, I'm very emotionally charged, so we have to embrace it, use that as an opportunity, and lean into it.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, trying you mentioned kind of some folks kind of wish that they could just be stoic and not feel emotion, and like I get that, right? In some ways it maybe feels like we'd be more productive or it just would be this whole area we didn't have to deal with. And some people can do that, right? Some people can really just kind of compartmentalize and put their feelings to the side, and we could really kind of unpack that whole thing and whether that's ultimately supportive, but I think you're identifying, right? It's kind of this, it's a fine line, right? It's that balance of being willing to bring some of our humanness to work. We spend so much
Mhm,
of our life in our work. So, to try to pretend that part of us isn't there, right? Like to leave our emotions at the doorstep is kind of difficult. But then to also find like a professional way of dealing with our emotions, right? Because it's, even if I'm having a bad day, I don't technically go into an office, but if I did and I just go in and I'm thinking of the movie from the 90s, The Office, right? Like I'm mad and I just like bring my baseball bat and start slamming the printer. Like it's probably like
mhm,
not the way to deal with my anger at work, but there's other ways that we can more proactively and more positively deal with them.
yep,
Um, but one of the things that I think about with emotion is part of it is that's what connects us as humans, right? Like those shared experiences, like you and I even being able to relate at the beginning of this call to our children, having some difficulties with sleep and the impact that has, like that helps
mhm,
us find some common ground. One, we're sharing experiences, but underneath those experiences are the emotions and the feelings that they evoke. And so at work, I think that's a and I think that's quite honestly, a challenge that we're seeing now with so many folks working remotely is there
mm,
aren't as many of those opportunities to really connect on the human level with each other, right? Kind of those water cooler conversations where we can
mm,
share our highs and our lows, and I think that's a unique challenge that we're facing now, and I think we'll continue to face as we work more remote because it's not quite the same to get on a FaceTime or a Zoom call and kind of really share what's going on. And I think maybe that's something we'll address more in the future is like how can we support these things even in a completely remote environment. Um,
mhm,
but I also liked what you said about just that we can bring emotions to work. It's just we also need to be mindful of how to do it in a composed way, right? And in a way that feels professional and kind of honors our humanness, but also honors that we have professional responsibility, and how that can actually support more of a sense of belonging because folks
mhm.
can really bring their whole self to work.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what you're saying about just relating via emotions. Like, yeah, yeah, that's, if you're looking to build belonging, if you're looking to strengthen relationships, connecting emotionally or of emotional stories or examples, like that's one of the fastest ways to build trust and rapport and caring and can strengthen collaboration. So it's definitely something that can be harnessed for positive collaboration in the workplace. And yeah, especially, and there are implications for remote work for sure. Like we're maybe, seeing, especially like my wife, she works remote as well. And I thought about this where like a lot of times like you just show up and because it's a Zoom meeting and it's not in person, maybe leaders may tend to just focus on the task, like boom, 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 let's get knock it out. Okay, see you later. Let's go. So we may need to be more intentional in remote situations to take some time to connect emotionally and and be more deliberate and intentional about that. And and so yeah, that was really interesting how you're bringing that up. I definitely think emotions in that capacity they do belong in the workplace, right? They can strengthen the relationships and collaboration and belonging in the culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I see it a lot with the clients that I coach who work primarily or mostly remote. I can see this kind of longing for connection. I
Mhm.
mean, remote work obviously brings so many benefits, and I think, that's where people are kind of willing to take it because the benefits are so it supports more connection at home in some ways, but it may not foster as much connection with coworkers and leaders. So yeah, and I appreciate what you shared with, bringing, that your wife my husband works remotely a few days a week, but goes in, and I work primarily remote. And I definitely sometimes am envious. Sometimes I'm like, it'd be nice to go back, and actually be around people. And, we talked about humor, just having some of the like workplace jokes and things like
Mhm.
that. So it's, recognizing how much emotions and just our shared humanity can really help connect us. And it also makes me think about empathy.
Mm.
And I just want to make a shout out that our LinkedIn Live from last month, which is accessible on all of our different social media platforms, we really explored empathy in leadership and how much that can help create what we're describing, these safe spaces, the psychological safety. And because emotions can feel tricky, we don't always
Mhm.
know the right thing to say or how to be there exactly, and that's okay, right? It's like the willingness
Mhm.
to just be with someone. And so if empathy is something that you're wanting to explore more, I definitely recommend, checking out one of our earlier broadcasts. So as we're starting to wind down, we've talked a little bit about different ways of supporting emotional regulation, but Jeff, I'm just curious, like kind of as some last takeaways, are there a few tips or recommendations for supporting emotional regulation that you would share with our viewers?
Yeah, for sure. So one, this kind of builds upon what you were just saying about it's okay if you don't know how to deal with this or how to approach it. Like approaching it with a growth mindset as a practice, as a learning opportunity, just get started, right? Some simple things you can do are journaling down your thoughts, your emotions, how you're feeling, and what you think is triggering them. This could be in a Word document, in a handwritten journal, in a voice memo, in your phone. A lot of times, just writing things down or getting them out of your head or talking about your emotions, even just to yourself, collecting your thoughts like that is powerful enough to kind of help you detach and build emotional skills and make better choices around what you want to do next. So I would definitely encourage just starting simple with a practice, noticing what's happening, documenting them, exploring them. It can be a really quick thing you do throughout the day, or it could be something you do at the end of each day. That's where I would recommend people really exploring.
That's great. Thanks, Jeff. I love because those are really self-awareness building tools, right? So, because sometimes we don't always know what we're feeling in the moment, right? And sometimes just journaling or talking it out can really help us get clearer on what's going on. And if I could offer a couple tools as well, I think one would be if you don't know what you're feeling, it's okay. Just like take a step back, maybe step away from the situation, maybe notice what's going on in your body, right? You might notice tight shoulders, shortness of breath, something going on in your belly, and sometimes just noticing what's happening in our body can be a really powerful first step in starting to identify, oh, when I get tight shouldered, I know I'm feeling stressed or I'm feeling angry. And then also just self compassion. It's probably my biggest tool
Mhm.
constantly for myself and for everyone because I think as humans we don't get a lot of practice with it, and really that willingness to just, it's okay that we feel what we feel, right? I think, if we all had a choice, we'd mostly feel the things we enjoy feeling, right? But we
Yeah.
recognize, as we talked about, we don't have a ton of control over our emotions as far as what's going to arise. And that willingness to just meet ourselves with that understanding and that validation, and that it's okay. It's okay to feel what I feel. And then I have a choice in what I do with those feelings, right? And then we can support our coworkers, we can support, as leaders, our teams in being able to do those same things. So, as always, we are here for you all at PCADI. If you could use support in growing, your emotional bandwidth and emotional regulation for yourself or with at work, we're here. We have a amazing cadre of coaches, including Jeff, and you can check out our website for all the services that we have. So, Jeff, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your time and for all of your insights and for being patient and giving me grace as we navigated the technology challenges at the beginning.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Awesome chatting with you.
Yeah, this is great. And so, thank you everyone who's checking this out live or who will see this recording in the future. We really appreciate you taking the time to dive into a little bit more about emotions with us. And we'll look forward to seeing you on our next LinkedIn Live. So, take care, everyone.
Bye, guys.